How's everybody doing today? Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, today we're going to be talking, this is lesson number 5. That's all. Lesson number 5 is the nature of God. Nature of God. And what's absolutely crucial, is to have a positive relationship with the Lord. We must know His nature and His real character. You got to know the person. Sometimes we can perceive we know someone and we really don't know them. And we're going to talk about a few stories today, or at least one story, no, 2 stories concerning this. Because if we're truly going to have an intimate, strong walk with God, we've got to get to really know who He is, knowing the heart of God. God's nature refers to the distinguishing characteristics, including the ways of thinking, feeling, and acting. It's the very essence and the heartbeat of who God is. Now, if I asked you today, who is God? What type of definition would you write? Who is God? I can tell you that definition of who God was 20 years ago and who God is today has drastically changed. And because it's drastically changed, my relationship has grown deeper and more intimate. And if you don't know Him, it really is challenging to serve Him and to really seek Him. And what we call prayer is really communication with God, isn't where it really needs to be. So again, we've got to discover this nature, the nature of God, the character of God, who He is. And we're going to discuss a few things today about that. Here's a quick question. Is He angry because of our sin? Or is He merciful and a loving God who wants to give us His life and blessing independent of our performance? Growing up, that was not the case. God blessed us dependent upon my performance. In other words, if I did good, God would be good to me. But if I did bad, then God would be bad toward me. And that was my assumption. And that's what my perception was. Maybe today some people in this room, that's their perception. And we think, well, I've got to be really, really good, then God can be really, really, really good toward me. And that's probably the biggest mishaps and even hindrance in our relationship with God. I know when I used to pray and seek God, and if I was going to ask for anything or dare to believe God for anything, I would, in the back of my mind, and begin to recite, did I do everything right? Have I been good? Because if I've been good, then I can pray with confidence. But if I messed up, then maybe He won't hear me. And there were times I'd get in my prayer closet or my communication with God, and I thought, I'd messed up here. Why is God going to hear me? Why would God do anything for me? And again, it's because I didn't know His nature. I didn't know who He was. I thought He blessed me or He moved in my life dependent upon me. Now, should we act crazy and do stupid things? No. But again, God doesn't bless us and move in our life dependent upon my performance. Okay? So we're going to begin to talk about some of these things. The Scriptures actually give us 2 different views of God. They do. And this is the misconception. This is a challenge. Not that He ever changed or done anything differently. There was a period of time that in the terminology used in the Bible, God held men's sins against Him. And that was the Old Testament. When the law came and passed, then man became accountable for those sins. If you messed up, then judgment would hit. Again, and it was some of the judgment was very severe. It was death. It was the death penalty. If you broke the laws of God, it's a death penalty. So then you're thinking, okay, is God really loving? I mean, He's bringing about the death penalty for doing certain things. So here we got this view in the Old Testament of a God that was judging man according to their sins. And then we cross over this New Testament. Well, is He the same? God isn't different, but the vehicles in which God demonstrated either judgment or grace has changed. God is still the same loving God in Genesis all the way to Revelations. He didn't change. It was the way He was using it, which was a covenant. And God set up laws, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. 2 different ways God deals with us. The law God and the grace God. And this right here has caused so much controversy. There's all kinds of debates based on these two, the law God and the grace God. And I want to ask you, because you can't mix them. You can't have, well, he's the law God and the grace God to me. We've discussed a little bit back in the, in the last few lessons that it's either this way or that way. If he's the law God and you want God to move upon your performance, then you've got to do all the law perfectly. If he's the grace God, then you've got to stay in that camp. You can't live in both camps. It cannot be the law and grace. The Bible said if you mix it, you really you dissolve the purpose of both of them, because both have a purpose. The law does have a purpose, and we're going to talk about that. Okay? So let me ask you a question today. Is he the law God in your life, or are you the grace God? Now, grace doesn't mean a license to sin and do whatever you want and go get drunk tonight and go commit adultery and go steal. That is not grace. Let's go to Titus real quick. Titus chapter 2. It's not in my notes, but I want to. Titus chapter 2. Verse 11. Titus 2:11. It says, "For the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men." Verse 12 says this, "Teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lusts, and we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present age." So here's this grace that has appeared and brings salvation to all. It teaches us what? That we can go live whichever we want? No. It teaches what? That we should deny ungodliness. That we shouldn't live, drunk and high and treat people bad. We shouldn't, endeavor to live in worldly lust. That we should live soberly. We should live righteously and godly in this present age. So the true grace of God teaches you right from wrong. It doesn't say, okay, I just look the other way and you can do whatever you want. No, the true grace of God does teach you to live right. So again, this is why the controversy. The law camp says, oh, you're just giving everybody a license to sin. The grace camp, says, hey, you're putting everybody under bondage. So sometimes we try to combine both. A little bit of law, a little bit of grace, and everybody's happy. It doesn't work. It's either one or the other. And that was the book of Galatians. The book of Galatians tried to intermingle both of them. And when you do that, you destroy the purpose of both. So either you choose one or the other. And hopefully through this process, I'm discovering the heart of God. He is a grace God. He is a God of grace. And he wants to demonstrate grace. And grace means the unmerited favor of God. But I also like this. It also means the divine influence within the hearts of people. Have you ever been under the influence of anger? What do? Yeah, crazy. You want to strangle somebody, slap somebody, crazy, right? But when we're under the influence of grace, what do you think grace would influence us to do? To die ungodliness, worldly lust, to live righteously, to live soberly in this world. So when we're under this influence of grace truly, we're not just wanting to dive into sin. We're wanting to run from sin because I'm under this influence of grace. So again, grace isn't a license of sin, but we're not under the law. So we're going to talk a little bit about the law in a little bit. Here's one aspect that we have to understand. 1 John 4:8. He who does not love does not know God. So I'm going to ask you a question. Do you love? Do you love? And I already went through a love series. Do you do what the Bible says love is? What God says love is, not what we perceive love to be. Do you do that? If you don't do that, then you don't know God. I don't care how long you've been serving God. The true acid test to us knowing God is how you love. It's how you love. We can perceive and say, well, I know God pretty good. It comes down to this. How do you love? And if you don't know love, you don't know God. Why? Because listen to this. For God is love. So he's the same. God is love in the Old Testament, even up under the law. But he is the same God in the New Covenant or the New Testament. And he is the God of love. He hasn't changed in that part. And you have to understand that. I've had times, well, if God loved me, why is this happening to me? If God really loved me, why did this take place? If God really loved me, why did this bad situation happen to me? Again, and that's, I think, one aspect of Satan trying to convince you of the love of God for you. I'm convinced that God is love. Are you? I'm convinced he loves me on the good days and the bad days. I'm convinced he's for me through thick and thin. I'm convinced. He doesn't have to convince me. I'm convinced of that. God is love. So let's read a story really quick. And let's go to John chapter 14. John chapter 14, verse 6. I love this story. Jesus is talking about his departure and him leaving. And if you read verse 1, he talks about in his Father's house are many mansions, and that he goes to prepare a place for us. And he gets to this place in verse 6. Most of us have heard this scripture at least 100 times, I guess. And Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He's not a way, he's the way. And he's the truth. You know, John chapter 8, and I think it's verse 32, it says, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Now, what is that? Who is truth? Jesus. So you can say this, and you shall know Jesus, and Jesus shall make you free. Why? Because he's the truth. The word truth in the Greek is this, reality. You know, we live in a certain reality. What is your reality? There's a whole different reality. When Jesus came and he walked on this planet, he demonstrated a heavenly reality. This is why he could grab a few loaves of bread and he could multiply them and feed thousands and thousands of people. This is why he could walk on water when other people's reality say, you can't do that. His reality was completely different. He walked above sin. He never sinned. How did he do that? Because he lived in a whole another dimension of reality. And when we begin to know Jesus, knowing Jesus brings freedom. Knowing Jesus brings freedom. And if I ask you who Jesus is to you, who is he? And I want to ask you this question, is there freedom in every aspect of your life? If there isn't, then there's a place in your life that you don't know Jesus. There's a place in your life that you don't know Jesus. Let's look at one area, the financial realm. Are we struggling consistently? Maybe there's a possibility you don't know the Jesus that really prospers. Is there sickness and disease in your life? Maybe you don't know Jesus, who he really is the healer. Is there depression in your life? Maybe you don't know the Jesus that brings peace and joy. See, because if you know truth, or if you know Jesus, knowing Jesus brings freedom in our lives. And this is the key. God's heart is for us to know him. And we can discover who he is through a man named Jesus Christ. You don't discover God through a religion. You discover God through Jesus. And if you ever want to know Jesus, if you ever want to know God, you've just got to know Jesus. And if you know Jesus, you know God. And if you know God, you know Jesus. So let's continue. If you had known me, you would have known my Father also. Okay? Verse 7. If you had known me, this is Jesus talking, you have known my Father also. And from now on, you know him and have seen him. Now, that's a crazy statement. Jesus said, if you know me, you know my Father. And I tell you, not only do you know him, but you've seen him. Wait a minute, I've never seen the Father. I've never seen him. But listen to what he says. And listen, I love Peter or Philip's response, and I think some of us are like this. Some of us are like this. Philip said to him, Lord, and I like that statement because he didn't say, he said, Lord. He's signifying his position. Lord, show us the Father. And I'm so glad he didn't say, show us God. He started to understand that it was a more intimate relationship than just God. Because God is a relationship and Father's a relationship. Two different relationships. And God took it a step further and he made it an intimate relationship. And Philip said, Lord, show us the Father, and it is sufficient for us. Listen to Jesus' response. And Jesus said to him, have I been with you so long, and yet you have not known me, Philip? And I think that's some of us. I think that's some of us. We've been in church, we've been in prayer meetings, went to conferences, and yet we're still saying, who is this Father? Philip said, show us the Father. Let me see him. And Jesus said, have I been with you so long, and you still don't know? And I want to ask you a question. Do you really know your daddy? Do you really know your Father? Because we can be saved and we can walk, and they walk with the very epitome of God himself, I guess, in the form of Jesus. They walk with him. They live with him. They slept next to him. They ate with him. They saw the miracles. They saw all these wonders. And yet Philip asked this question, show us the Father. And Jesus said, man, if you've seen me, you've seen him. If you've seen me, you've seen him. And this is why I love the life of Jesus, because he didn't just come die for our sins. He came to reveal the Father. He came to bring things back in its perspective, because we can lose sight, especially looking in the Old Testament. You think he's a God of judgment, and he's out to get people. But all of a sudden, you look in the New Testament, and it seemed like something shifted. I want to ask you, how many of you have ever read the Gospels and really followed the life of Jesus? How did he treat people? How did he treat the woman at the well? How did he treat the man that was demon-possessed and lived naked in the tombs? How did he treat, a Peter who doubted him? How did he treat a Thomas who questioned him? How did he treat the woman caught in adultery? How did he treat these people? How did he treat them? And see, when you walk with him, you start discovering you mean that's how the Father would want to treat people? You mean that's how our Father would deal with this situation, the way you're dealing with it, Jesus? Because we're quick to throw rocks. We're quick to criticize. We're quick for vengeance. We're quick for judgment. We love the law. And some of us, we like the God of the law. Come on, show up, God of the law, and deal with this issue. Get those people back. Show them they shouldn't be doing this. But do we really want the God of grace? Listen to what Jesus said. He who has seen me has seen the Father. So how can you say, show us the Father? He's asking questions. He just keeps asking questions. Do you not believe that I'm in the Father and the Father's in me? That's huge. I'm in him and he's in me. So when you see him, you see me. When you see me, you see him. Do you know that you're in Christ and Christ is in you? So when they see you, they should see him, and they see you, they should see vice versa. Do we really walk in that level of walk? Do you not believe that I'm in the Father and the Father's in me? And the words that I speak to you, I do not speak on my own authority. So the things that he said and how he conducted and what he spoke, he said, I'm not just saying them to say them. I'm saying them under the authority of the Father. Listen what he says. But the Father who dwells in me does the works. Let me go to the next verse. Sorry for y'all. Verse 11. Listen to this. But the Father who dwells in me does the work. Verse 11. It said, believe me that I'm in the Father. And he's trying to convince Philip of something. Believe me that I'm in the Father. And the Father's in me. And it's so funny because he uses this. Or else believe me for the sake of the works themselves. Come on, maybe my words aren't enough. But look at my actions. I want to ask you. Our life should not just be mere words. But it should be works. So here goes, okay, if you don't believe this by what I say, at least look back at my track record. Look how I've treated everybody. Look at all the miracles. Look at all the wonders. When you've seen me, I'm in him and he's in me. Jesus had such a revelation of oneness. He really did. Do you have that same revelation of oneness? That I'm in him and he's in me. I'm in him and he's in me. This becomes a game changer in your life. Well, he didn't live in me because I'm unholy. I'm no good. I'm filthy. No. He did something so supernatural in your life that he lives in you. Remember the three presences? One was the omnipresence. One was the inner presence, which means he lives in you 24/7, 7 days a week. You know what I was taught? That if I made a mistake, he left. That he left. And then when I said, I'm sorry, he came back. Then I made a mistake. He left. That's a wrong concept. That made it very difficult to have a true intimate relationship because I was so conscientious of my mistakes. I felt like I was walking on eggshells at times. And there was a time I was going to walk away from God because I didn't think I was good enough or worthy enough. I didn't understand the God in the Gospels. I didn't understand the Jesus who loved the brokenhearted, the misfits, the wretched, the outcast, that he was merciful, and he was good, and he was gracious. Let's continue. When God introduced the law, that did not mean God's nature changed, but how he dealt with men. He didn't change. He was still the same God of love. Just a different vehicle. For a season. For a season. Here's a really, really profound verse. It says, for until the law, sin was in the world, but sin was not imputed when there was no law. Sin was not imputed when there was no law. In other words, from Genesis, which was from Adam to Moses, there was no law. But still sin. There was no law. Yeah, there was no law. The word imputed means this. It means to charge to one's account. Now, if anyone has a credit card, you know exactly what that means. It's a charge to one account. Anybody ever use a credit card, walk into Dillard's and ting? You didn't pay for it. It's charged to your account. One day you're going to have to pay for it. When the law showed up, sin began to be imputed to your account. And I mean, y'all had a big sin debt. I had a huge sin debt. Some were bigger than others, but at the end of the day, we all had a sin debt. But from Adam to Moses, there was no sin debt. He couldn't charge it to people's account. And what a profound thing. But let's begin to talk a little bit about the law so we can understand this. Romans 5:20 says this. And there are six things that took place because of the law. Six things that the law does. God's law was given so that all people could see how sinful they were. You're going to notice in these six things, none of them were, the law was so we could fulfill it or so we could accomplish it. The law was given so that all people could see how sinful they were. How many ever looked in the mirror in the morning and weren't so happy what you saw? I think everybody, right? Oh, my goodness, what is that? You know, if we didn't have a mirror, some of us would have walked in here not knowing what you look like. I thought you looking good, and your hair is looking crazy, right? The law's purpose was to show all the defects that really were there. You know, how many ever woke up and you had a pimple on your face? Oh, man, dang it. Hate them. I remember being young. Didn't want to go to school. I remember one day I had one that grew real big. I didn't go to church that Sunday because I had a big pimple. But the law showed that we were all teenagers with a bunch of them. We all had defects. I don't care how good you are in comparison to your neighbor. At the end of the day, the law showed our imperfection. It showed our sinfulness. Romans chapter 3, 19 through 20 says this. Now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, listen to this, that every mouth should be stopped. And all the world may become what? All the world, not some, all the world may become guilty before God. Therefore, by the deeds of the law, no flesh will be. And in the sight, for by the law is the knowledge of. Here are the six things. 5, and we're going to go to the verse. 6 things the law does. It shows how sinful we are. It shows how sinful we are. 2, it stops every mouth. Oh, I know you think you're good. But if Mr. Law showed up in this room, he would hush every person. There's no way, not in the midst of the law. Good isn't enough. If you make a 99, you're a failure in the presence because it demands perfection. You cannot judge yourself compared to your neighbor. The world will be guilty. Now, the law will make you guilty. I promise you that. This is why the Pharisees who thought they were all that in a bag of chips, and you said, oh, the law says thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say this, that if you look at a person lustfully, you've committed adultery in your heart. Oh, the law says that you should murder, but I say this. He took it up a standard, that if you hate someone, that you've committed murder in your heart. So he went further, because we're always trying to say, okay, this is good, I'm not that bad. No, everyone's guilty. Number 4, no flesh is justified. You go to heaven today and you want God to allow you to get into heaven based on your good works, you won't make it. Mother Teresa won't make it. No, she's a wonderful woman, right? She won't make it. Joel Osteen looked like he wouldn't hurt a kitten. He won't make it either. No. Verse 5. Not 5. 5, by the law is the knowledge of sin. Now, you're going to notice none of this is so, okay, so this is so you can keep them. Because God ultimately knew you couldn't keep them. He had to reveal how bad we really were. So when you want the God of the law, this is what the law is going to do. It's going to show how sinful you are. If you try to put people under the law, all you're going to do is expose all the defects in their life. Every mouth will be stopped. The world will become guilty. No flesh will be justified. We read that in those verses. It's not something I made up. I even highlighted them red. No flesh is justified, and by the law is the knowledge of sin. And this is the sixth one, and we're going to go to this verse. It was our schoolmaster or tutor to bring us to Christ. Now here's the verse so we can look at it. Galatians chapter 3:24. Therefore the law was our tutor to bring us to Christ, that we might be justified by the law, by faith. Listen to this. But after faith has come, we are no longer under a tutor. What are you saying here, Paul? Who was the tutor? So we're no longer under the tutor. Why? He brought us to Christ. Christ is our example. Christ lives in us. I don't need the tutor anymore. I've got the person. Now here's the word tutor in the Greek. You ready? It's a guide and a guardian of boys. Among the Greeks and Romans, the name was applied to trustworthy slaves who were in charge with the duty of supervising the life and morals of boys belonging to the better class. In our days, that would be called a nanny. Be a nanny. Someone who would watch our kids, huh? As much as you can. The boys were not allowed as much as to step out of the house without them before arriving at the age of manhood. So again, this tutor was for immature little kids who needed somebody to supervise them. That was the purpose of the law. Yeah, you can put that. But when it brought us to Christ, we no longer need the tutor. I'll give you an illustration. If you had the opportunity to have a mom or dad or a nanny, which one would you choose? Do you think a nanny could really do as good as a mother or a father? And people choose a nanny over the father. I don't need the nanny anymore. I don't need the tutor. I've got the Father. And this is what Galatians is trying to say. When you're a little kid, the nanny had to take care of you and watch over you. But as you've grown, which now we've grown into the family of God, I don't need the tutor anymore. I've got him. Here's three aspects of God's nature that I need you to understand. You ready? This is Romans chapter 5, 6 through 11. For when we were still without strength, in due time Christ died for the ungodly. For scarcely for a righteous man will one die. Yet perhaps for a good man, someone would even dare to die. But God demonstrated his love toward us, and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Why would he do that? We weren't compadres. We weren't amigos. We weren't even children. We were sinners. Listen to this, verse 9. Much more than having now been justified by his blood, we shall be saved from the wrath through him. For if we were enemies, did you know you're an enemy of God at one time in your life? I was his enemy. We were reconciled to God through the death of his son. much more having been reconciled, we shall be saved by his life. God loved us in these three states. You ready? When we were without strength. In other words, you couldn't do it. I tried. Even after I gave my life to God, I tried. I really did. But here God looked down on us and he said, look at these little guys. They're going to try really hard. They were without strength. Second, they demonstrated his love. He said, look at a person. Scarcely will someone die for a righteous person. Oh, perhaps someone will die for a good one. But God demonstrated his love. Why? Because God is love. And he did this not for his children. He didn't do it for his compadres. He did it for sinners and enemies. Sinners and enemies. Now, I don't know if you ever perceived yourselves as a sinner and enemy, but that's how we were BC before Christ. But God loved us enough to die for us in that state. No, not when you were a kid. See, I'll die for my kids. But would I die for my enemies? Would you? Without strength. We didn't have the ability to get where we needed to get. So here he said, I'm going to die for them. I've tried. I've tried to do it in my strength and my ability. I tried to establish my own righteousness. And that was the condition, trying to establish their own righteousness. And how many ever tried to establish their own? Say, okay, I got 3 good stars today. I have had a good 3 days or a good week. I'm a good person. God should do something for me. Now, you're trying to establish your own righteousness. And when you do that, you don't submit to his righteousness. So you have this place. Do I establish my own? If you do, that's self-righteousness, and you're in trouble because now you got to be perfect. And I know 100% there's nobody in this room that can do that. So we need to submit under this. And how do we become righteous? It's by faith. It's simply by faith. And you thought, that's just too easy. I share people, no, that's just too easy. He had to make it that way. We like to make it difficult. We like to set our own standards, so then all of a sudden everybody has to meet our standards. But your standards aren't good enough. God's standards are impossible. But remember, the law came for 6 different things. Okay? As sinners, as enemies. Let's go to John chapter 8. John chapter 8, the second story, and I'm done, and we'll take the test. And I don't have the scripture, so you can open your Bible and follow along. 1 through 11, really quick. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Now, early in the morning, he came again into the temple. And all the people came to him. Now, where was Jesus? He was in the temple, okay? And all the people came to him, and he sat down, and he taught them. Then the scribes and the Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. Where did they bring that woman that was caught in adultery? In the temple. Now, how many ever watched the movie and he's outside in the sand? That's not true. He was in the temple. So they brought her in the temple, okay? So he was not writing in the sand, all right? just for your clarification, okay? And they brought to him a woman caught in adultery. Now, under the law, the God of the law, it was stoning. You're going to die. You're going to die. The God of the law, you're dead. You commit adultery, you're dead. Why did he treat sin so severe? Because sin is like a cancer, it'll spread. So he had to place this thing, law, because it spreads. It'll start to contaminate and things start to get havoc. You'll go to some cities, they're worse than other cities. You know why? Stuff is spread. So this is the only way he could deal with sin at that time. And so again, let me go back here. They said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act." Now listen, verse 5. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what do you say? What do you say? This they said, testing him that they might have something of which to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and he wrote in the sand. Now, on the ground with his finger. Now, if you understand what's in the temple, they were stone. I love Joseph Prince. Joseph Prince taught me something. Why do you think he was writing on the stone? What were the 10 Commandments written on? Stone. tablets. I could imagine said, oh, you like to come up with the law, but you've done some stuff too. We love stone. We love the God of the law. Why didn't he treat this woman like the God of the law? Why didn't he do it? Because something was shifting. He wanted people to capture the true heart of God. We're going from an Old Testament into a New Testament, an Old Covenant into a New Covenant. They love the law. And I've seen people who love the God of the law. Oh, they'll beat people down. They'll tell you you need to do this, and you can't wear makeup, and you can't wear blue jeans, and you can't shave your legs. I'm so thankful that those people are not here. I couldn't imagine reaching down and touching my wife's legs. I don't know where they come up with some of this stuff. They like furry people, I guess. I don't know. So when they continued asking him, I mean, they just kept hammering Jesus, and he kept writing on the temple floor of stone. He raised himself up and said, he who's without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. Now, I'm so blessed he didn't say, he that's never committed adultery. Because then someone might say, I've never done it. I've never committed adultery. He said, okay, whoever's never sinned. That's the wisdom of God. That's the wisdom of God. When's the last time you've thrown rocks? You criticize, I can't believe they did that. You know, whether they realize it, you're the God of the law. You like the God of the law. I can't believe they just keep on and keep on and keep on. When are they going to get it? We become very critical and cynical. So they kept hammering him because they wanted Jesus. They were testing him. And he said, he who's without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. And again, he stooped down and he wrote on the ground, which was tablets of stone, I guess you would say. Then those who heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest, even to the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. And when Jesus had raised himself up and saw no one but the woman, he said to her, woman, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you? Has no one condemned you? He asked her a question. There was nobody but him and her. Nobody. Listen to what she said. She said, no one, teacher. She knew whose presence she was in. She said, no one, Lord. I wonder if she knew who he was. Evidently nobody else did. And Jesus said to her, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. See, he didn't condone sin, but he didn't also condemn her. He said, don't do it no more. Don't live like this. Don't live in an adulterous lifestyle, because sin does have consequences. And you will have to pay the piper from this natural perspective. But Jesus had every right to condemn her. He could have been the God of the law. Why didn't he do it? Because God is love. And he was about to change the whole concept of who God was and how God demonstrated and touched people's lives. But do you want the God of the law and the God of grace? You have to choose. I want to challenge you to read one of the Gospels this week. One of the Gospels, whichever one. And look and see, is he the God of the law? Why don't you read one? Or is he really the God of grace? Was he the God of law with this woman? Was he the God of the grace? When he met the woman at the well, was he the God of the law or the God of grace? This woman had been with 5 different people and was still staying with one other person. Why didn't he treat her with the God of the law? Why didn't he beat her up? When you've seen people come to him who were sick, was he the God of the law? Or was he the God of grace? Do you think they deserved it more than anybody else? No. You know, 2 people in the Bible, only 2 people in the Bible that Jesus said that they had great faith. You know who they were? No. It was a Roman centurion and a Greek lady, a woman. In other words, they weren't Jews. You know why I believe that he said your faith was great? Or they didn't have obstacles to their faith because they didn't have to worry about all this law stuff. Only 2 people. One was a Roman centurion. The other one was a Greek woman. See, the law brings a lot of conflict because it brings a lot of demands. It measures you. Some of us, we feel like, okay, I'm good enough. This is why Paul, at one time of his life, he said, concerning the law, was blameless. Now, do you really believe he was blameless? No. Later on, when he came into Christ, he said, I'm the chief of all sinners. How did he go from a place of saying, I'm blameless from the law, to a place saying, I'm the biggest and worst sinner on this planet, which he wasn't in the natural. But when you're confronted with the law and you realize your position in that law, the only other place is, man, I'm low. Or you can try to convince yourself, I'm pretty good. I'm good enough. When you're really eyeball to eyeball with the law, it'll make you guilty. You'll never be justified. If you try to measure the law according to your little old standard, then you can make yourself feel like, I'm blameless. I'm good. I'm better than everybody else. But the law isn't just good, it's perfect. So again, how did Jesus treat this woman? Grace. Did Philip know the Father? No. He said, show us. Do you know the Father? You'll never know the Father if you don't know Jesus. So this is one of your challenges. If you really want to know the Father, read the gospel and look at the life of Jesus and see how he treated people. Then ask yourself, do I treat people the same way? Because people will challenge you, and people will annoy you, and people will frustrate you. And this is what's key. This is why I love the Gospels. In looking at the life of Jesus, did he make people sick? Did he kill people? Did he judge people? What did he do through his life? His 33 and a half years on this planet, how did he treat people? Then if you've seen him, you've seen the Father. And if we're really going to have an intimate, strong relationship with him, then we need to know who he is. Any person you really want to have a strong, intimate relationship, you need to know that person. You really do. Not a casual acquaintance, but really know him. And if there's one person in this whole universe that you need to know, is your Father. Do you know him? You ready?